My name is Madison Clark. I'm 28, and I thought I knew my family until my sister's wedding day. Standing there in my maid of honor dress, watching my mother raise her champagne glass with that strange smile I'd never seen before, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. To the daughter who truly deserves this happiness, she announced, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The room erupted in confused murmurs, my sister's face went white, and I realized that everything I believed about love, loyalty, and family was about to crumble. Hey everyone, before we dive into this wild family drama that completely turned my world upside down, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If stories about family secrets and shocking revelations get your heart racing like they do mine, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, you're going to want to hear every twist in this unbelievable tale. This isn't just about a wedding toast gone wrong. It's about discovering that the people closest to you can be complete strangers, and sometimes karma has a way of serving justice in the most unexpected ways. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's unpack how one sentence at a wedding reception exposed decades of lies and changed everything. Growing up, everyone always told me how lucky I was to have such a perfect family. The Clarks were the golden standard in our small Connecticut town. My father David was a successful lawyer, my mother Patricia was the president of 3 different charity boards, and my sister Olivia was the quintessential, all-American princess. 2 years younger than me, Olivia had always been the shining star that everyone gravitated toward. She had the perfect blonde hair that caught sunlight just right, the kind of effortless grace that made her homecoming queen, and a laugh that could make even the grumpiest person smile. I, on the other hand, was what people politely called the responsible one. While Olivia was out being prom queen and dating the football captain, I was studying for AP tests and working part-time jobs to save for college. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't bitter about it. I genuinely loved my sister and felt proud of her accomplishments. We had what I thought was a close relationship, sharing secrets, supporting each other through heartbreaks, and planning our futures together. My parents always seemed fair in their treatment of us, or so I believed. Sure, they attended more of Olivia's cheerleading competitions than my debate tournaments, but I convinced myself it was because her events were more social, more fun. When she got a brand new car for her 16th birthday while I got Dad's old Honda, I told myself it was practical. I was the older one, I should be more responsible. When college time came around, Olivia got her pick of schools while I was encouraged to consider the state university for financial reasons. I accepted it as logical. The pattern continued into adulthood. When Olivia decided to drop out of college junior year to pursue finding herself through a year-long European adventure, my parents funded it entirely. When I graduated summa cum laude and wanted to attend graduate school, I was told that investments were tight and maybe I should consider working for a few years first. When Olivia started her boutique business that consistently lost money, mysterious loans from family kept appearing. When I bought my first house, I did it entirely on my own, proud of my independence but secretly wondering why no one offered to help. But families are complicated, right? That's what I told myself. Olivia needed more support because she was more creative, more free-spirited. I was the stable one, the one who didn't need as much help. This narrative became so ingrained in our family dynamic that I actually started to believe it myself. I wore my independence like armor, telling friends how proud I was that I'd made my own way in the world. The wedding planning process should have been my first real warning sign. When Olivia announced her engagement to Marcus, a wonderful guy she'd met through mutual friends, my parents immediately started talking about the wedding of the century. The budget they casually mentioned made my eyes water. It was more than I'd spent on my entire education. When I hesitantly asked about contributing since I was the maid of honor, my mother laughed and said, "Oh honey, this is our gift to Olivia. You just focus on your duties." My duties, as it turned out, were extensive. Despite not being involved in any major decisions, I was expected to coordinate with vendors, manage the bridal party, handle last-minute crises, and basically ensure everything ran smoothly while Olivia focused on enjoying her special time. I threw myself into the role with my typical dedication, determined to make her day perfect. The shower, the bachelorette party, the dress fittings. Through it all, I noticed little things that didn't quite add up. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Meaningful looks between my parents that they thought I didn't catch. Olivia seemed almost guilty, sometimes apologizing for things that didn't warrant apologies, bringing me expensive gifts just because. I brushed it all off as wedding stress. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was helping my mother address invitations when she made an offhand comment that would later take on significant meaning. "You know, Madison," she said, without looking up from her elegant calligraphy, "I hope someday you'll understand that everything we've done has been out of love." At the time, I thought she was just being sentimental about Olivia growing up and getting married. I had no idea she was preparing me for something much bigger. The night before the wedding, staying at my childhood home, I couldn't sleep. Something felt off, like the air before a storm. I wandered downstairs for some water and heard voices in my father's study. The door was slightly ajar, and through it, I could see my parents and Olivia in what appeared to be a serious conversation. I heard my mother say something about telling her the truth, and Olivia responding with, "Not yet, please, just let me have this day." I assumed they were talking about some minor family drama, or maybe concerns about the marriage itself. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, I felt an overwhelming sense of nostalgia mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. It was like being on the edge of understanding something important but not quite being able to grasp it. I thought about all the times I'd felt like an outsider in my own family, all the little inequalities I'd rationalized away, all the moments when I felt like I was missing some crucial piece of information that everyone else seemed fired in that calm to have. I told myself I was just emotional about my baby sister getting married, that it was natural to feel reflective at times like these. But deep down, some part of me knew that tomorrow would change everything, though I could never have imagined how dramatically or how permanently. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that in less than 12 hours that mysterious toast would shatter every assumption I'd ever made about my place in the Clark family hierarchy. The morning of Olivia's wedding dawned crisp and beautiful, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that makes everything look like a magazine photo. I arrived at the venue early, my arms full of emergency supplies and my phone buzzing with vendor confirmations. The historic mansion where the ceremony was taking place had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers, and enough candlelight to make everyone look ethereal. As the maid of honor, I was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine, making sure every detail was perfect. Olivia seemed unusually nervous, more than typical pre-wedding jitters would explain. She kept asking me if I was happy, if I felt loved by the family, strange questions that seemed out of place given the day's focus. When I assured her that of course I did, she would get this look in her eyes, relief mixed with something that looked almost like guilt. My mother was in full hostess mode, gliding through the preparations with the kind of grace that came from years of organizing charity galas and social events. But I noticed she kept watching me as if waiting for something. When I caught her eye, she would smile, but there was something different about it, something I'd never seen before. It was almost apologetic. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Olivia looked absolutely radiant in her designer gown that probably cost more than my car, and Marcus's face when he saw her walking down the aisle was everything you'd want to see in a groom. I stood at the altar holding her bouquet, fighting back tears of joy for my sister, while simultaneously feeling that strange undercurrent of unease that had been building for weeks. During the ceremony, I noticed several family, friends, and relatives giving me odd looks. "Mrs. Henderson, who'd known us since we were children, kept staring at me with what I can only describe as pity. Uncle Robert, my father's brother, seemed unable to make eye contact with me at all. Even my grandmother, typically the most straightforward person in our family, seemed unusually emotional, dabbing at her eyes more than the touching ceremony warranted. The cocktail hour after the ceremony passed in a blur of congratulations and small talk. I mingled with guests, accepting compliments on my coordination of the day, while fielding the usual questions about when it would be my turn. Several people made comments about how different Olivia and I were, how remarkable it was that we got along so well despite being so unlike each other. At the time, I thought they were just making conversation, but looking back, those comments take on a much more significant meaning. It was during dinner that things started to feel really wrong. I was seated at the head table, of course, but I noticed that several of my extended family members kept looking between me and my parents with expressions I couldn't quite read. My cousin Jennifer, who I'd always been close with, seemed like she wanted to say something to me several times but kept stopping herself. When I asked if everything was okay, she just hugged me tighter than usual and said, "I love you, Madison. I want you to remember that." My father's speech as father of the bride was everything you'd expect. Touching stories about Olivia growing up, wishes for her happiness, welcome to Marcus into the family. But there were several moments where he seemed to lose his train of thought, looking over at me with an expression I'd never seen before. He kept emphasizing how much he loved both his daughters in a way that seemed almost defensive, as if someone had suggested otherwise. Then came my mother's turn to speak. She stood up, champagne glass in hand, and the room fell silent in that expectant way that happens before important toasts. She looked beautiful in her mother of the bride dress, every inch the elegant matriarch our family had always seemed blessed to have. But as she began to speak, something in her demeanor shifted. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this joyous occasion," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. "Watching Olivia today so radiant and happy reminds me of why we make the choices we do as parents." She paused, her eyes scanning the room before settling on me with an intensity that made my stomach clench. "We've always tried to do what we believed was best for our family, even when those decisions were complicated." The room was completely silent now, guests sensing that this wasn't going to be a typical mother of the bride toast. Olivia had gone pale, and I could see Marcus squeezing her hand under the table. My father looked like he was about to interrupt, but my mother continued before he could speak. "Today, as we celebrate the union of two people who truly belong together, I think it's time for honesty. Complete honesty." Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "So I want to raise my glass to the daughter who truly deserves this happiness, who has earned every blessing through her character, her kindness, and her strength." The words hit me like a physical blow. The daughter who truly deserves this happiness. Not both daughters or my daughters. The daughter. Singular. The implication hung in the air like smoke, and I could feel every eye in the room turning toward me. Some guests looked confused, others appeared to be putting pieces together, and a few, particularly the older family members, looked resigned, as if they'd been expecting this moment for years. Olivia started to stand up, reaching toward our mother with panic in her eyes, but my mother gently motioned for her to sit. "Madison," she continued, her voice now directed specifically at me, "has spent her entire life being the responsible one, the independent one, the one who never needed anything from us. But the truth is, we failed you. We failed you in ways that you don't even know yet, and I can't let another day pass without acknowledging that." The reception hall was so quiet you could hear the candles flickering. I felt like I was underwater, like sound was coming from very far away. This was supposed to be Olivia's perfect day, and somehow it had become about me in the most horrifying way possible. I started to stand to excuse myself, to flee from whatever revelation was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. But my mother wasn't finished. "So here's to Madison Clark," she said, raising her glass higher, who deserves to know that every sacrifice she's made, every time she's been passed over, every moment she's felt like she wasn't quite enough, none of it was her fault. None of it was because she wasn't worthy of the same love and investment we gave so freely elsewhere. As she drank from her champagne glass, the implications of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about wedding day emotions or sibling rivalry. This was about something much bigger, something that had been hidden for my entire life. And as I sat there, frozen in my maid of honor dress with hundreds of people staring at me, I realized that my world was about to change in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. The silence that followed my mother's toast felt eternal. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as every face in the reception hall turned toward our table. Olivia looked like she might be sick. Marcus appeared completely bewildered, and my father had gone ashen. But it was my mother who commanded the room, standing there with a mixture of determination and what looked like relief on her face. "Patricia," my father said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that everyone could hear. "This isn't the time." "When is the time, David?" she replied, her voice stronger now. "When Madison is 40, 50. When we're gone and she never gets to understand why her entire life felt like she was on the outside looking in." I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Mom, what are you talking about?" She set down her champagne glass and moved closer to me, her elegant wedding guest facade finally cracking to reveal something raw and real underneath. "Madison, honey, sit down, please." But I couldn't sit down. I couldn't do anything except stand there as my mind raced through every interaction, every slight, every moment of feeling different that I'd experienced in my 28 years. "Just tell me," I said, my voice getting stronger. "Whatever it is, just tell me right now." My mother looked around the room at all the guests, family, friends, colleagues, all watching this family drama unfold at what was supposed to be a celebration. For a moment I thought she might back down, might suggest we discuss this privately later. But then her shoulders straightened and she made a decision that would change everything. "Madison isn't our biological daughter," she said clearly, her words carrying across the silent room. "She was adopted." The words hit me like a physical blow, but somehow they also explained everything. Every feeling of not quite belonging, every instance where I felt like I was missing some crucial family inside joke, every time I wondered why I looked so different from everyone else. It was like a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving suddenly clicking into place. But that wasn't the end of it. My mother continued, and each word made the situation more devastating. "We adopted you when you were 6 months old. Your birth mother was Patricia's younger sister Rebecca, who died in a car accident when you were a baby. Rebecca wasn't married, and she'd hidden her pregnancy from most of the family. When she died, we were asked to take you in." The room was spinning now. Not only was I adopted, but my biological mother was actually my aunt, the sister my mother rarely talked about, who supposedly died young in an accident. I gripped the back of my chair to steady myself as more pieces started falling into the cloud place. "We should have told you," my mother continued, tears finally appearing in her eyes. "We planned to tell you when you were older, but then Olivia came along 2 years later, and it became easier to just let you both believe you were sisters. Rebecca looked so much like you, and you fit into our family so naturally that sometimes even we forgot. This is exactly the moment where I need you all to stick with me, because what comes next gets even more shocking. I know some of you are probably thinking about your own families right now, wondering what secrets might be hidden there. If this story is hitting close to home, or if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, let me know in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. The support from this community has been incredible, and I'm going to need every bit of it for what I'm about to tell you next. But why, I managed to ask, my voice breaking, why was I treated so differently? If you chose to adopt me, if you wanted me, why did I always feel like I was competing for attention and losing? This is where my father finally spoke up, and his words cut deeper than anything else. Because Rebecca wasn't just Patricia's sister, he said quietly. She was. She was someone I'd been involved with before Patricia and I were married. We'd broken up, I'd moved on with Patricia, but Rebecca was. Madison, she was pregnant with my child. The revelation hit the room like a bomb going off. I wasn't just adopted. I was my father's biological daughter with another woman, a woman who happened to be my adoptive mother's sister. The family dynamics suddenly made horrifying sense. I was a constant reminder of my father's relationship with another woman living under the same roof as the wife who'd graciously taken in her sister's child, her husband's child. So Olivia is my half-sister, I asked, the pieces still falling into place. And you, I looked at my mother, you've been raising your husband's child with your dead sister for 28 years. Yes, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for how I handled it. You deserved better. You deserved the truth, and you deserved to be treated with the same love and priority that we gave Olivia. Instead, I let my own pain and resentment affect how I treated you, and that was wrong. The room was absolutely silent, except for the sound of Olivia crying. She stood up suddenly, her wedding dress rustling. Madison, I knew, she said through her tears. I've known since I was 16. I overheard them fighting about it one night. I wanted to tell you so many times, but they made me promise not to. They said it would destroy the family. Everything was becoming clear now. The preferential treatment, the financial support that always seemed to flow to Olivia while I was encouraged to be independent. It wasn't because I was more capable or because Olivia needed more help. It was because I was a reminder of a painful chapter in my parents' marriage, while Olivia was their real daughter. All these years, I said, my voice getting stronger as anger began to replace shock, all these years I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I wasn't working hard enough, wasn't deserving enough, wasn't lovable enough to get the same treatment. I bent over backwards trying to prove my worth to this family, and it was never about my worth at all. My father tried to approach me. Madison, you have to understand we did love you. We do love you. But it was complicated, I cut him off, my voice rising. What was complicated about treating your own daughter with basic fairness? What was complicated about not making me feel like I had to earn love that Olivia got? Automatically, the wedding guests were starting to shift uncomfortably. Some were quietly gathering their things, clearly feeling like this was too private a moment to witness. Others seemed frozen, unable to look away from the family implosion happening before their eyes. Marcus, bless him, finally stood up and took charge. I think maybe we should move this conversation somewhere private, he suggested gently. This is a lot for everyone to process. But I wasn't done. 28 years of feeling like I wasn't quite enough, of wondering what was wrong with me, of accepting less, because I'd been conditioned to believe I deserved less. It was all pouring out now. No, I said firmly. If my mother chose to expose this truth in front of everyone, then we're going to deal with it in front of everyone. I want to know everything. How much money have you spent on Olivia over the years compared to what you spent on me? How many opportunities did you give her that you didn't give me? How many times did you make decisions based on the fact that she was your real daughter and I was just the reminder of Dad's past? The questions kept coming, and with each answer, the scope of the inequality became more apparent. The car, the college funding, the business investments, the down payment help that had been offered to Olivia but never to me. All of it had been influenced by my true parentage and my mother's unresolved feelings about it. As the truth unfolded in front of 200 wedding guests, I realized that this moment was both the worst and the best thing that had ever happened to me. Worst because it shattered every assumption I'd made about my life and my family. Best because it finally explained why I'd spent my entire life feeling like I was running a race with different rules than everyone else. The financial disparity alone was staggering. When we finally got to the private room and started adding up numbers, the difference in investment was close to $200,000 over the course of our lives. College tuition, cars, business loans, travel, housing assistance. Olivia had received all of it while I'd been told to be independent and self-sufficient. But it wasn't just about money. It was about every missed school event, every achievement that went uncelebrated, every time I was made to feel like asking for help was somehow inappropriate. It was about growing up believing that love was something you had to earn through perfect behavior and exceptional achievement, while watching someone else receive it freely just for existing. As we sat in that private room with Olivia still in her wedding dress and my parents looking older than they had that morning, I realized that this revelation was simultaneously destroying my old life and creating the possibility for a new one. For the first time in 28 years, I understood that the problem had never been me. The hours that followed my mother's revelation felt like living in someone else's nightmare. The wedding reception, which had been planned as a celebration of love and family unity, had transformed into something that would be talked about in our social circle for years to come. Guests awkwardly finished their meals while stealing glances at our family's ongoing implosion, and I could see phones being discreetly pulled out as people undoubtedly texted friends and family about the drama they were witnessing. Marcus, showing exactly why Olivia had been smart to marry him, managed to salvage what remained of their wedding day by suggesting that the immediate family retreat to a private room while the reception continued with dancing and drinks. It was a graceful solution that allowed the other guests to enjoy themselves while giving us space to deal with the emotional wreckage. In the small bridal suite off the main reception hall, the five of us, my parents, Olivia, Marcus, and I, sat in a circle that felt more like a therapy session than a family gathering. Olivia was still in her wedding dress, makeup smeared from crying, holding Marcus's hand like a lifeline. My parents looked older than they had that morning, the weight of their secret finally visible on their faces. "I need to understand the timeline," I said, my voice steady, despite feeling anything but calm inside. "I need to know exactly how this happened, and how long you've all been lying to me." My father took a deep breath and began the story I'd never heard. Rebecca had been the wild child of their family. Beautiful, impulsive, and prone to making dramatic decisions. She and my father had dated for about a year when they were both in their early 20s before he met my mother. Their relationship had been passionate but volatile, ending when Rebecca decided she needed to find herself and move to California. "I didn't even know she was pregnant," he said quietly. "She never told me." Patricia and I had been married for about 6 months when Rebecca called to say she was coming home because she was having a baby and needed family support. She never mentioned who the father was. My mother picked up the story from there, her voice hollow. "Rebecca came home when she was about 6 months along. She was planning to raise you herself, but she was struggling. No job, no real plan, still acting like a child herself. When you were born, she asked if we could help watch you while she got on her feet. The car accident had happened when I was 6 months old. Rebecca had been driving to a job interview in the next town over when she was hit by a drunk driver. She died instantly, leaving behind a baby with no other family except my father, who didn't even know he was the father, and my mother, who had just learned the truth about her sister's secret when they went through Rebecca's things after the funeral. We found letters she'd written but never sent," my mother explained. "Love letters to David, talking about their relationship, about you being his daughter. She'd never planned to tell anyone, but she'd written it all down, like she was working up the courage. So, I'd grown up in a house where my mother knew I was the biological child of her husband and her dead sister, but my father didn't learn the truth until I was already 10 years old. A paternity test secretly ordered by my mother during one of my childhood doctor visits had confirmed what she already suspected. "Why didn't you tell him then?" I asked, looking at my mother. Why keep it a secret from both of us for so long? Because I was scared, she admitted. Scared that if David knew you were his biological daughter, he'd love you more than Olivia. Scared that you'd become the favorite, the real child, and Olivia would be pushed aside. Scared that he'd see Rebecca every time he looked at you and remember what they'd had together. It was a twisted logic, but I could almost understand it. In trying to protect Olivia from feeling like the outsider, my mother had made me the outsider instead. In trying to avoid the complications of the truth, she'd created a much more damaging situation where I spent my entire life wondering why I wasn't quite enough. "And when did you find out?" I asked my father. "When you were 10, he said. "Patricia finally told me after you'd been asking questions about why you look different from the family photos. I wanted to tell you then, but Patricia convinced me it would be traumatic, that you were settled and happy, that it was better to wait until you were older." But older had never come. Every year, it became easier to maintain the status quo, to let me believe I was just the less favored biological daughter, rather than face the complicated truth. And as the years passed, their unequal treatment of me had become so normalized that they'd probably stopped thinking about why they were doing it. Olivia, who had been quiet through most of this explanation, finally spoke up. "Madison, I'm so sorry. When I found out, I begged them to tell you. I felt terrible every time they helped me with something and didn't help you. I tried to share things with you to make up for it somehow, but I knew it wasn't enough." I looked at my sister, my half-sister, in her wedding dress, seeing her clearly for the first time in my life. She really had tried to include me to make me feel valued, but she'd been fighting against a family dynamic that was rigged from the start. It wasn't her fault that she'd been the golden child any more than it was my fault that I'd been the forgotten one. The anger I'd felt initially was beginning to transform into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of clarity that I'd never had before. Every feeling of inadequacy, every moment of self-doubt, every time I'd wondered if I was asking for too much, none of it had been about my actual worth. It had all been about a family secret that had poisoned relationships for nearly 3 decades. "What happens now?" I asked, looking around the circle. "Where do we go from here?" It was Marcus who answered first. "Well," he said with a weak smile, "this certainly wasn't how I expected my wedding day to go, but I married into this family chaos and all. Madison, you're still Olivia's sister, still my sister-in-law, and nothing that happened before I came along changes how I see you." My father cleared his throat. "Madison, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that finding out you were my daughter was one of the happiest days of my life. Not because of Rebecca, but because it meant that this smart, independent, incredible young woman I'd been so proud to raise was actually my flesh and blood." "Then why?" I asked, the hurt still raw in my voice. "Didn't you act like it?" "Because your mother asked me not to," he said simply. "She was terrified that if I treated you differently, everyone would figure out the truth. She made me promise to keep treating you exactly the same as I always had, and I thought I was doing what was best for the family. But that was the problem, wasn't it? In trying to keep the family together by maintaining their secret, they'd created a hierarchy that had damaged everyone involved. I'd grown up feeling unloved, Olivia had grown up with unearned guilt, and my parents had spent decades managing a lie that grew more complicated every year. As we sat in that bridal suite, still in our wedding attire, dealing with the wreckage of nearly 3 decades of family dysfunction, I realized that this moment was actually a gift. Not the method of delivery, that had been cruel and selfish on my mother's part, but the truth itself, finally spoken, was freeing me from a lifetime of wondering what was wrong with me. For the first time in my life, I understood that I hadn't been the problem. The problem had been a family system built on secrets, lies, and the impossible task of pretending that complicated truths could be hidden forever. And while that understanding didn't immediately heal the years of hurt, it gave me something I'd never had before, the knowledge that I had been worthy of love and equal treatment all along. In the weeks that followed, what our family would forever refer to as the wedding incident, I found myself looking back at my entire life through a completely different lens. Memories that I'd filed away as minor disappointments or character-building experiences suddenly took on new significance, and patterns that had been invisible to me became glaringly obvious. I thought about every time someone had commented on how different I looked from the rest of the family. I had my father's green eyes and stubborn chin, but I'd always attributed any resemblance to coincidence rather than genetics. My darker hair and taller frame had always made me feel like the odd one out in family photos, but I'd convinced myself that was normal sibling variation. The financial inequities became impossible to ignore once I knew the truth. I started adding up numbers in my head. The cost of Olivia's car versus mine, her college tuition at a private university versus my state school education, the loans for her business that were never expected to be repaid versus my struggle to get a small loan for my house down payment that I'd had to pay back with interest. When I did the math, the difference was staggering. Over the course of our lives, my parents had invested probably close to $200, more in Olivia's opportunities than in mine. But it wasn't just about money. It was about attention, encouragement, and the subtle ways that families communicate value. I remembered every time my mother had attended Olivia's school events but missed mine due to scheduling conflicts. Every time my father had bragged about Olivia's achievements to his colleagues while mentioning my accomplishments as an afterthought. Every time they'd ask detailed questions about Olivia's life while giving me surface-level attention. The most painful realization was understanding how I'd internalized their treatment of me. I'd spent years believing that I wasn't the type of person who deserved help, that asking for support was somehow weak or inappropriate. I'd prided myself on my independence, not realizing that it hadn't been a choice so much as a necessity. I'd been conditioned to expect less, and to be grateful for scraps of attention that other people would consider basic parental love. 3 weeks after the wedding, I decided to reach out to some extended family members who had been at the reception that day. I needed to know how many people had known the truth and for how long. The conversations were eye-opening and heartbreaking. My Aunt Susan, my father's sister, admitted that she'd suspected something when I was a child but had never felt it was her place to ask questions. "You looked so much like your father, but when I'd mention it, your parents would change the subject quickly," she told me over coffee. I always thought there was something they weren't telling people. My grandmother, my father's mother, had apparently known the truth from the beginning. "Your grandfather and I were the ones who suggested David take the paternity test," she revealed during a phone call that left me speechless. "We could see Rebecca in you, but we could see David too. When the test confirmed it, we begged them to tell you the truth, but Patricia was so adamant that it would ruin the family." Even more shocking was learning that several family friends had figured it out over the years. Mrs. Henderson, our longtime neighbor, admitted that she'd always known something was off about the family dynamics. "I watched you work so hard for every bit of approval while Olivia seemed to get attention just for existing," she said. "It never seemed fair, but families have their own ways of doing things." The picture that emerged from these conversations was of a conspiracy of silence that had protected everyone except me. People had noticed the inequality, had suspected the truth, but had chosen to stay quiet rather than disrupt what appeared to be a functional family unit. I'd been sacrificed on the altar of family harmony, and the adults who should have protected me had prioritized keeping the peace over ensuring I received fair treatment. I also began to understand my mother's psychology better, though understanding didn't equal forgiveness. She'd been a young wife who discovered that her husband's child with her sister was living in her home. Rather than dealing with those complicated feelings through therapy or honest conversation, she'd chosen to manage them by emotionally distancing herself from me, while overcompensating with Olivia. My father's role in this dysfunction was perhaps even more troubling because it was so passive. He'd known I was his biological daughter for 18 years and had never once advocated for equal treatment. He'd allowed his wife's unprocessed grief and jealousy to dictate how his own child was treated, choosing the path of least resistance over standing up for what was right. The impact on Olivia was something I was only beginning to understand. She'd grown up knowing she was the preferred child but not fully understanding why. The knowledge that I was her half-sister had been a burden she'd carried alone for over a decade, creating guilt every time she received advantages that I didn't. In trying to protect her from feeling displaced, my parents had actually damaged her too by making her complicit in a system of favoritism she was too young to challenge. But perhaps the most devastating realization was understanding how this dynamic had affected my relationships outside the family. I'd spent my entire adult life gravitating toward people and situations where I had to prove my worth, where love and approval were conditional on my performance. I'd chosen boyfriends who were emotionally unavailable friends who took more than they gave, and even career situations where I was undervalued and overworked. I'd thought I was attracted to challenges that I preferred to earn what I received, rather than have things handed to me. But the truth was that I'd been conditioned to believe that conditional love was all I deserved, that I had to constantly prove myself worthy of basic respect and care. The more I understood about how this family secret had shaped my entire personality and worldview, the angrier I became. Not just at my parents, but at the extended family members who had known or suspected and said nothing. At the family, friends who had noticed the inequality but chosen not to speak up. At a whole community of adults who had failed to protect a child because it was easier to maintain the status quo than to ask difficult questions. But along with the anger came something unexpected: relief. For the first time in my life, I had an explanation for why I'd always felt like I was swimming upstream, why normal family dynamics had seemed foreign to me, why I'd spent decades wondering what was fundamentally wrong with me that made me so hard to love. There was nothing wrong with me. There never had been. I'd been a child caught in an impossible situation created by adults who were too cowardly to deal with their own emotional complications. And while that knowledge didn't erase years of damage, it gave me something precious: the understanding that I deserved better, that I always had, and that the treatment I'd received said nothing about my worth and everything about their failures. 6 months after the wedding revelation, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a lawyer. Not because I wanted to destroy my family, but because I realized that decades of financial discrimination based on a secret they'd kept from me might actually constitute a legal issue. When I explained the situation to the attorney, her eyebrows raised significantly. "What you're describing could potentially be considered breach of fiduciary duty," she explained. "Your father had a legal and moral obligation to treat both his children equitably, especially since you were legally adopted and therefore entitled to the same inheritance rights as any biological child." The legal consultation opened my eyes to aspects of the situation I hadn't even considered. All those years of unequal financial support, all the opportunities given to Olivia that were denied to me, all the investments in her future while I was told to be independent. It wasn't just unfair, it was potentially illegal. Discrimination against a legally adopted child. But I didn't want to sue my family. What I wanted was accountability, and frankly, some form of justice that acknowledged the very real financial impact their deception had on my life. So I asked my lawyer to draft a letter outlining the situation and requesting a meeting to discuss equitable resolution. The letter had exactly the effect I'd hoped for. Within 48 hours, my father called, panic evident in his voice. "Madison, we need to talk, all of us. Can you come over this weekend?" When I arrived at my childhood home that Saturday, I found my parents and Olivia waiting in the living room with their own lawyer present. The atmosphere was tense, formal, completely unlike any family gathering we'd ever had. but for the first time in my life I felt like I was walking into that room as an equal rather than as the family member who had to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. My lawyer had advised me to come prepared with documentation, so I'd spent weeks gathering evidence of the financial disparities. Bank statements showing the money transfers to Olivia's business, receipts from when they'd paid for her car, her college, her post-graduation finding myself trip to Europe, documentation of every loan they'd given her versus every loan I'd had to secure independently. The numbers laid out in black and white were even more staggering than I'd realized. "We need to talk about making this right," I said, placing the folder on the coffee table. "Not just the emotional damage, though, that's significant, but the actual financial impact of your decisions to treat me differently based on information I didn't have." What followed was the most honest conversation my family had ever had. My parents were forced to confront the reality of what their secret keeping had cost me, not just emotionally but financially. They had to acknowledge that their treatment of me hadn't just been unfair, it had been discriminatory and potentially legally problematic. The resolution we reached wasn't just about money, though money was certainly part of it. They agreed to pay me a sum that roughly equaled the difference in what they'd invested in Olivia versus what they'd invested in me over the years. More importantly, they agreed to establish a formal trust that would ensure any future family wealth would be divided equally between Olivia and me. But the most satisfying part of the resolution was the required acknowledgement. As part of our agreement, my parents had to write a formal letter acknowledging their treatment of me, apologizing for the damage it caused, and stating clearly that their behavior had been based on their own emotional issues, not any deficiency on my part. That letter, more than any financial compensation, validated what I'd always known deep down: I had deserved better. The changes in family dynamics since then have been profound. My mother started therapy to deal with her unresolved feelings about Rebecca and the complicated emotions of raising her sister's child. My father began making genuine efforts to have a real relationship with me, separate from the family secret that had overshadowed our connection for so long. Olivia and I surprisingly have grown closer than ever. Once the truth was out and the financial inequities were addressed, we were finally able to have an honest relationship without the weight of secrets and guilt between us. She's expressed genuine remorse for the years she stayed silent, and I've come to understand that she was as much a victim of our parents' dysfunctional choices as I was. But perhaps the most significant change has been in how I see myself and my place in the world. For the first time in my life, I'm in relationships, romantic, professional, and personal, where I expect to be treated with respect and equality. I'm no longer grateful for the bare minimum or willing to accept less than I deserve, because I've finally internalized the truth that I am worthy of real love and respect. I started a blog about my experience, and the response has been overwhelming. Hundreds of people have reached out, sharing their own stories of family secrets, favoritism, and the long-term damage caused by parents who treat their children unequally. It turns out that my story, while extreme in its details, represents a much more common experience than I'd realized. The most frequent question I get from readers is whether I've forgiven my parents. The answer is complicated. I've forgiven them in the sense that I'm no longer consumed by anger about what happened. I understand that they were young adults dealing with a complicated situation, and that they made the best decisions they knew how to make at the time, even though those decisions were ultimately harmful. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that what happened was okay. They stole nearly 3 decades of authentic family relationships from me through their deception. They allowed me to suffer through years of self-doubt and feelings of inadequacy rather than deal with their own emotional complications. And while I can forgive them as flawed human beings, I can't pretend that their choices didn't have lasting consequences. Looking back now, I can see that my mother's toast at Olivia's wedding, while traumatic in the moment, was actually the greatest gift she could have given me. Not because of how she did it. That was cruel and selfish. but because she finally freed me from a life built on lies. She gave me the truth I needed to understand my own worth and to build authentic relationships based on who I really am rather than who I thought I needed to be to earn love. The irony isn't lost on me that this story of family betrayal and deception ultimately led to the most honest relationships I've ever had. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could happen to you. Sometimes having your world shattered is exactly what you need to build a better one. So here's my question for all of you who've stuck with me through this incredible journey. Have you ever had a moment where a devastating truth actually set you free? Maybe it was discovering a family secret, learning something difficult about a relationship, or having an assumption about your life completely shattered. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because I've learned that sharing these experiences helps all of us feel less alone in dealing with family drama and complicated relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm show this video to people who might need to hear it. And definitely subscribe because I'll be sharing more stories about family dynamics, setting boundaries, and learning to value yourself in relationships where others might not. Share this with anyone who might be dealing with their own family secrets or struggling with feeling like they don't quite belong in their own family. Thank you all for listening to my story and for the incredible support you've shown. I hope my experience helps someone else recognize their own worth and understand that sometimes the people who should love us unconditionally are the ones who need to learn how to do better. Remember, you deserve love that doesn't come with conditions, support that doesn't depend on keeping secrets, and relationships where you can be fully yourself without having to earn your place. Don't settle for less than that, and don't ever believe that being treated poorly is somehow your fault. Keep fighting for the respect you deserve, and I'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore more stories about family justice and learning to put yourself first. Until then, take care of yourselves.